Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics. I'd like to remind members and the public that today's meeting is televised and will be made available via the House of Commons website. Now, pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, December the 11th, 2020, the committee is resuming its study on the protection of privacy and reputation on platforms such as Pornhub. With us today, we have the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the Honourable Bill Blair, and Minister of Justice, the Honourable David Lametti, and the Commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Lucki. Now, we are starting a little late, so I'm going to ask the ministers to introduce the officials that they have joining them. Before we get started, I'm going to just ask for the committee's indulgence for just 1 second. When we last met, we did have a discussion. There was a growing consensus amongst committee members to hear from the law clerk. And so we have set aside the third hour of this meeting to hear from the law clerk to provide us information that would be helpful in making a decision with regards to issues that were being discussed at our last meeting. So I will just inform members that the law clerk is prepared to answer those questions at 1 o'clock today. And so we will. I just wanted to make that members aware of that, and so that's what we will turn to after the first 2 hours of this meeting. Ministers, we'll turn to you now and hear from you. I believe Minister Blair, will you go first?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to members of this committee. I'd like to begin by thanking you all for the invitation to join you this morning for this very important and very timely study on a very significant issue. Mr. Chair, I think, as everyone recognizes, the sexual abuse and exploitation of a child, any child, in any context, in any platform, and in any place, is intolerable and unacceptable. It is the most heinous of crimes and deserves society's strongest condemnation and our effective response. Recording the sexual abuse of a child can have significant lifelong impacts on both the victims and the survivors of this crime. And sadly, as some of these victims grow older, many come to realize that their images continue to be circulated on the internet, and they are re-victimized over and over again as this material is shared. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the remarkable courage and resilience of survivors in coming forward and speaking out. I've had an opportunity to meet with 11, and I think I share this committee's appall at reports of this, that abhorrent material of this kind has been found on platforms, and it is unacceptable that victims have encountered difficulties in getting companies to remove this illegal content. Their stories and experiences remind us all of the important work that we must do and are doing to protect children and youth. The Government of Canada plays a leading role in these efforts to combat online child sexual exploitation. And Mr. Chair, we are taking action to increase awareness and to reduce the stigma of reporting. This is important because we know that a number of reported cases is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the true scale of this most heinous of crimes. Internet companies must also do more to protect children, and we are taking steps to hold them to account for their role in this. We are also taking action to bring more perpetrators to justice by supporting efforts to detect, investigate, and prosecute these cases. I have asked the RCMP Commissioner to continue to work with her provincial and territorial counterparts to address this crime and to ensure that prosecutions are done when deemed appropriate by evidence and by law enforcement. Canada's national strategy on this issue is led by Public Safety Canada, which works in partnership with the RCMP, the Department of Justice, and the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, or as it's very often known, C3P. We are backing this national strategy with ongoing annual funding of more than $18 million. And that includes for support for cybertip.ca, a national tip line operated by C3P. It also includes $5.8 million in ongoing funding announced in 2018 to increase the investigative capacity of the RCMP's National Child Exploitation Crime Center. And on top of this, in budget 2019, we invested $22.2 million over 3 years in additional funding to better protect children from this horrendous crime. And of that amount, Mr. Chair, $15 million is specifically aimed at enhancing the capacity of internet child exploitation units in municipal and provincial police services right across Canada. These specialized units are dedicated to investigating cases of online child sexual exploitation. Investments in Budget 2019 are also helping to increase public awareness of this crime, to reduce the stigma associated with reporting, and to work with the digital industry to find new ways to combat sexual exploitation of children online. And at the same time, it's important to acknowledge the complexities and jurisdictional challenges involved in what is often a borderless crime. Perpetrators and victims can be located anywhere in the world, and images of child sexual abuse and exploitation can be shared on platforms that may be headquartered in one country, but legally registered in another, with servers in yet a third and different country. This affects the authority and challenges the ability of Canadian law enforcement agencies to investigate and the application of Canadian laws. But, Mr. Chair, I am confident law enforcement continues to do the work to do everything possible to investigate these horrendous crimes and prosecute those responsible. International cooperation is key in this regard, and I want to assure you that the RCMP and the Department of Justice work very closely with international partners on investigations and prosecutions. We also work closely with our international allies and partners to find solutions to better protect children and youth. Last year, for example, Canada and its Five Eyes partners launched the voluntary principles to counter online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And these principles are a guide for industry on how to counter this scourge on their platforms. We recognize that also that there is much more work to do. And that's why we will introduce legislation to create a new regulator that will ensure that online platforms remove harmful content, including depictions of child sexual exploitation and intimate images that are shared without consent. Public Safety Canada and other departments are working on this proposed legislation with Canadian Heritage, which leads this effort. We will continue to do everything we can to protect Canadian children and to support Canadian survivors of this terrible crime. And we will continue to work with domestic and international partners to investigate cases where evidence exists and to bring the perpetrators to justice. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. We'll turn to Minister David Lametti. Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis soutenu aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With me is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Mr. François Daigle. Thank you for the invitation today. I'd like to make a few general statements on certain issues raised during previous meetings of the committee. The government is determined to ensure the safety of our children, also online, as Minister Blair has just said.
Forms of making, distributing, transmitting, making available, accessing, selling, advertising, exporting, and possessing child pornography, which the Criminal Code broadly defines as material involving the depiction of sexual exploitation of persons under the age of 18 years. The Criminal Code also prohibits luring, that is, communicating with a young person using a computer, including online, for the purpose of facilitating the commission of a sexual offense against that young person. It prohibits agreeing to or making arrangements with another person to commit a sexual offense against a child, and it prohibits providing sexually explicit material to a young person for the purpose of facilitating the commission of a sexual offense against that young person. Further, the Criminal Code also prohibits voyeurism and the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, which are both particularly germane to the online world and the discussion we're having today. Offenses of general application may also apply to criminal conduct that takes place online or that is facilitated by the use of the internet. For example, criminal harassment and human trafficking offenses may apply depending upon the facts of the case. Courts are also authorized to order the removal of child sexual exploitation material and other criminal content such as intimate images, voyeuristic material, or hate propaganda where it is being made available to the public from a server in Canada. En plus du code criminel, en tant que ministre de la
On top of the criminal code, as Minister of Justice, I'm also responsible for the binding statement on child porn online by people providing online services. Law practitioners call it the Law on Mandatory Reporting Act. Under the Act on the Mandatory Reporting Act, Internet service providers in Canada have two main obligations. First, to communicate with the Canadian Centre for the Protection of Children when they receive a complaint on child porn by a subscriber. This non-government center runs cyber. The sound chopped out at that point. The second obligation is on the part of internet services providers is to let jurisdictional authorities know if a child porn crime has been committed.
It is my understanding that there has been some concern as to how they are being interpreted and implemented, especially in relation to the troubling media reports about MindGeek and its Pornhub site. As Minister of Justice, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on ongoing or potential investigations or prosecutions. But I would also note that the responsibility for the administration of criminal justice, including the investigation and prosecution of such crimes, including the sexual exploitation offenses, largely falls to my provincial colleagues and counterparts. However, as the Prime Minister stated during question period on February 3rd, cracking down on illegal online content is something we are taking very, very seriously, whether it is hate speech, terrorism, child exploitation, or other illegal acts. In fact, the government takes these measures so seriously that the Prime Minister has given 4 ministers the mandate to address different aspects of online harms. Minister Blair and I are 2 of those ministers, and as he has mentioned, the Minister of Heritage is one of the lead ministers as well. While the internet has provided many benefits to Canada and the world, it has also provided criminals with a medium that extends their reach and thus their victim base, and a medium that elevates the level of complexity of investigations. One complicating factor is that telecommunications networks and services transcend international borders, while the enforcement authority of police, such as the RCMP, is generally limited to their domestic jurisdiction. Further, under international law, court orders are generally enforceable only within the jurisdiction of a state, and with limited exceptions, their enforcement requires the consent of the other state in which they are sought to be enforced. Canada
clearly is not the only one dealing with these issues, and that's why we continue to work in collaboration with our international partners to facilitate international cooperation in investigations and prosecutions with regard to these crimes, including strengthening bilateral collaboration and signing of agreements to fight these matters. Even though legal cooperation agreements are universally accepted, when it comes to receiving international aid in a criminal investigation, even in emergency situations, they were not designed for the internet age, where images are transferred quickly and where it's very important to collect information as quickly as possible to prosecute perpetrators. And Canada is working actively with its international partners to make these issues go forward. We are working on an additional protocol on cyber criminality, working with the Council of Europe to increase international cooperation with regard to transporter access to information. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Commissioner Lucky, I'm not sure if you had an opening statement. Did you have anything you'd like to make? Thank you so much for being here.
Point of order.
Point of order, recognizing point of order, Mr. Angus.
Yeah, no offense to Commissioner Lucky, but she's staying for the second hour. Our 2 ministers will be leaving, which is going to really interrupt our ability to ask them questions. I'd prefer to ask them questions and have her make her statement in the second hour, unless they're willing to stay.
Yeah. So sorry, she did indicate by a head movement that she did not have an opening statement, so we'll proceed to questions by members. Thank you, Mr. Angus. Ms. Stubbs, we'll start with you. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, ministers, for being here. Minister Blair, 70 MPs across parties have written to you, of course, about the cases of child exploitation, child sexual assault material, instances of human trafficking and rape on MindGeek sites. Early in November and again in December, you said you assured us of the robust framework and prohibitions in the criminal code, which certainly Minister Lamet has just outlined in depth as well. December, and you sort of alluded to this, you said you reached out to the RCMP to offer support in response to these abhorrent revelations about MindGeek and Pornhub and other sites. Can you just tell committee members exactly, specifically, what that looked like, what support you offered?
Thank you very much, Ms. Stubbs. And yes, I did in fact have a conversation with the RCMP and asked what they needed in order to respond appropriately to the concerns raised by our colleagues with respect to child exploitation and human trafficking. As a direct result of those conversations, we brought forward actually in the sub-C and in the mains estimates that were recently voted on additional funding for the RCMP in response to their concerns. The responsibility for conducting these investigations is a shared one between the RCMP and the police of jurisdiction. And so we asked what did they need in order to do that. We also provided funding available to police services that have their own child exploitation units. And as well, we included that funding in the main and supplementary estimates we brought forward.
So I'm not, of course, going to ask you to comment on any kind of details about any specifics, because you can't, and I appreciate that. But can you just tell members, so have you confirmed just simply that there are investigations ongoing?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Stubbs. And you quite rightfully identify that the Minister of Public Safety cannot direct an investigation of any kind. And although I can be briefed on certain aspects of the investigation, it's entirely the responsibility of the RCMP to reveal.
So is there one going on? For Canadians,
again,
have you confirmed that there is one going on?
And what I can tell you, it's the responsibility of the RCMP to either to confirm or not the existence of an investigation. And frankly, I would be very concerned about. I would be very concerned about compromising their effectiveness by revealing information.
Sure, but a yes or no, of course, doesn't compromise anything. It would just confirm for Canadians that elected officials and law enforcement has taken action on this very heinous crime, as you've outlined. So in your opening comments, you mentioned funding in the 2018 and 2019 budgets, as well as anticipated now legislation for a regulator. I guess what I'm that by your own words, and then also in the words of a variety of experts, for example, the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, who told this committee that they'd released a report. This is a comprehensive legal analysis showing under longstanding Canadian common law that these platforms are already liable for the user-generated content they promote, that these platforms are already liable for circulating illegal user-generated content, that content that they're and that the definition of child pornography in the criminal code is among the world's broadest. That was said by a representative of the Department of Justice, that it's not only images that we protect against or criminalize the distribution of, but it's also audio pornography and also 2 forms of written pornography. That representative said, quote, "It often is the problem of the application of the law and how that works when the rubber hits the road." So I guess on behalf of all Canadians, and most importantly on behalf of victims who are heinously exploited and continue to be victimized in Canada right now, and as a call for justice, for accountability, and for consequences on behalf of those of all of those innocent Canadians, what is it exactly that you are going to do as Minister responsible for public safety to ensure that Canada's laws are actually enforced?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an important question. I agree with you that the legal framework that currently exists in Canada dealing with child exploitation is a robust one. We also know that the RCMP and municipal and provincial police services have a very significant job and sometimes challenging job in gathering the evidence they need. And that's why we went to them and asked what resources they need in order to conduct those investigations. We have, as a government, ensured that we've provided those resources. We've also asked law enforcement enforcement and the RCMP what additional support and tools that they may need, and we've always been very responsive to that. As I also mentioned, that there are a number of other initiatives on the way, and I think the Attorney General could perhaps provide more insight with respect to mandatory reporting of online harms and the removal of those harms from things. There's a number of important initiatives underway.
But I think here's the concern that Canadians would have. If it is the case, as you've said and experts have said, that a strong legal framework already exists, how is it that, you outlining budget commitments from 2018 and 2019 and also planning for yet another law will actually, how you actually ensure that justice is done for those victims and these crimes are cracked down on and the perpetrators are held to account?
Yeah, and it's really important in these investigations to make sure that law enforcement has the tools and the resources they need to do their job, and we have ensured that. And in fact, we've provided $15 million, for example. When I was the police chief in Toronto, Mr. Stubbs, I actually ran a child exploitation unit. We did enormously important work there in identifying the perpetrators and even rescuing children from these horrendous situations. But it was important that they be adequately resourced and funded, and so we've taken steps as a government to ensure that those municipal, provincial, and the RCMP, those police services have the resources they need to do their job. And with the actual conduct of their investigations, I would quite appropriately leave it to them to comment. But the government recognizes that we have a responsibility to make sure not only that we have a strong legislative tools available to law enforcement, but that they have the capacity and resources to address this most heinous of crime.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. I'll stop you there. I know that our time runs short here, but we'll turn to Mr. Sobera now for the next round of questions. Mr. Sobera.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. This study that the Ethics Committee has been undertaking, we've been at this for a number of weeks and heard some quite shocking testimony that I could probably say, frankly, that for the majority of us, turned our stomachs in a very bad manner. There's a couple of days where I know I went home thinking about the testimony that I had heard about child exploitation, something that we want no child to go to be put through, whether it is here in Canada or globally. So I wish to thank all my colleagues for their work on this and thank the ministers here. First off, to Minister Blair and Minister Lametti, and I can both like to hear an answer. With regards to the work being done by Minister Guilbeault of Canadian Heritage, in terms of a new regulator to address online hate, sharing of non-consensual images, child pornography, and incitement to violence and terrorism, currently within our Crime Center, which is largely responsible for all incoming and outgoing online-based child sexual exploitation reported offenses with Canada. How is this new regulator going to work with the existing NCECC? And if you can keep your answers succinct, that would be great, because I do have follow-up questions.
I'm happy to begin here. Thank you, Mr. Sobera, for your question, and I certainly agree with all the sentiments that you have raised in your opening remark, and certainly with what Minister Blair has said. My role in all this as Minister of Justice is to ensure that Canada's criminal laws and other laws cover the domestic situation, and we work with a number of different ministers and ministries and international partners to make sure that things work as a matter of international cooperation as well, to make sure that there aren't any legislative gaps in terms of criminal code protections or other. Without revealing the contents of what might be in a draft bill, because I can't do that, you know that, and you all know that. The kinds of things that have been suggested is how to make internet service providers more responsible in terms of mandatory reporting. So are there ways in which the Mandatory Reporting Act could be made more robust? Are there ways in which information could be protected in a more robust manner? For example, to help law enforcement agencies and prosecutions to build and maintain evidentiary cases. So all of those things are the kinds of things that would fall under that category. Obviously, I won't go into any kind. Those are kinds of things that have been raised in the public domain. So I won't go into any details about what might be in a proposed bill.
Minister Blair, any follow-up, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Sabera. Again, I will be somewhat cautious in talking about legislation that may be coming forward, but from a public safety perspective, and what we have heard very clearly from law enforcement is essentially three principles: that there would be a mandatory reporting of online harms, which can include the sexual exploitation of children. That there would be steps taken to preserve evidence that would then be used by law enforcement in the conduct of investigation and ultimately by prosecutors in a criminal prosecution that might arise from those online harms, and then to end the victimization that its presence online represents. And so from a law enforcement perspective, that's what we've heard very clearly from the police right across the country, that what they would like to see in legislation.
Thank you. And I do wish to note, I just do wish to say that I wish to thank, obviously, yourselves as ministers and the Treasury Board Secretariat under Minister Duclos. In the 2021 main estimates, there was a substantial increase in funding, $6.3 million for the National Strategy to Combat Human Trafficking, $4.4 million for the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and $4.2 million for protecting children from sexual exploitation online. Budget 2009, I would say, announced funding of $4.4 million in 2019-20 and $8.7 million in 2021. So it's great to see that. I do wish to pivot in a certain way. I've learned a lot in this study about platforms, about a lot of legalese, language and information. I do agree we do have a robust system in place. I think is Section 162 and in that realm and those numbers for child exploitation. But I do wish to flag something because I think it's important this morning, and I do. I was able to read some papers, and we've received a lot of literature. A lot of briefs have been sent to us, and more so than in almost any other study I've seen. One from the Center for Gender and Sexual Health Equality, impacts of criminalization, punitive regulation of online sex work and pornography, the need for sex workers' voices. Another one, an article that was written by a gentleman by the name of Justin Ling out of McLean, Governments Have Failed Canada's Sex Workers and the Running Out of Patience. And it all goes back to Bill C-336 that was brought in by the Conservatives. And our role, and also the Bedford case for which I've been reading up on, our role as legislators to protect all Canadians, protect children from being exploited, and to allow Canadians to work safely in any sort of environment. And I've looked at other countries, be it New Zealand and Germany, and it seems to me that we need to make sure we don't drive work underground, and that sex workers' voices need to be listened to, and that we are not harming Canadians rather than helping Canadians. So I wish to put it out to in a broad type of question, Minister Lametti, in terms of how sex work is regulated in Canada.
I do apologize, Mr. Sabera, that the clock indicates that your time is up, and so we'll turn to Madame Gaudreau now. Madame Gaudreau.
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup. Merci.
Hello, and thank you so much for being here. I am going to come at this from a different angle. Thank you for your answers. They've been fairly clear, and it's quite encouraging, actually, because as a mother and as the representative of my constituents, I can say that people are really upset because given everything going on, the sound is cutting in and out. So it's very important that we pass the right kind of legislation and to actually enforce it. So my question is, how is it that with all the legislation we have at our disposal, given the increasing amounts of money we're investing to follow and help victims and to make sure they are not re-victimized, how is it that when we have a law which is being reviewed, such as PIPEDA, how is it that some provinces how is it that these provinces have moved even more quickly than the federal government to protect personal information? Personal information includes personal dignity and includes anything related to all of us. Some provinces, like Alberta and Quebec, have provided support. And given that at the federal level, it takes a long time to change legislation, how is it that in the digital age, when things move so quickly, why can't we change our Broadcasting Act very quickly? Why are we not trying to amend the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act to make sure that all of our work, including international collaboration, are effective? So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear the ministers answer that question. Thank you very much for your question, Ms. Gaudreau. Now, obviously, there are many aspects to this issue. There are many ministers involved, many departments, and a lot of legislation that comes together around this issue. And at the federal level, we have the Personal Information Protection Act, which covers areas of federal jurisdiction, and I'm responsible for that. We also have the Innovation Minister, who is responsible for parts of PIPEDA. And as you know, there is a bill before the House right now to modernize existing legislation. In fact, I myself have asked for opinions on the Personal Information Protection Act. So it is challenges. We are working with provinces because they also have a say in this matter. Now, we know that technologies change so quickly, and technology knows no borders, so we are working with other countries. However, yes, we do have to continually update and modernize our legislation, and this is challenging, especially when it comes to enforcement, as you have described. Yes, I do understand that you are responsible for part of this legislation, Mr. Lametti, but when it comes to updating and modernizing legislation to help these victims, when I talk to these young people, they say governments come and go. The reset button is constantly pushed. So at the end of the day, we are forgotten. There is help out there, but the help seems to disappear once in a while because legislation, which should be enforced, is not keeping up with the reality on the ground. Because if the law kept up with changing technologies, we could help victims better. Victims are already at the end of their rope. So there are gaps which we have to fill. We have to move more quickly. We have to move as quickly as the internet does.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Certainly, yes, we are reacting. As Minister Blair said, we're investing in these things. We are improving the enforcement of legislation, and we are working with other countries, with other police forces around the world. So we are doing something, and I honestly believe that there's not a single government in Canadian history which has acted as quickly as we are. So we're working on this. But yes, it does take time, it does take investment, but we're doing that now. And we are continuing to modernize. It's an ongoing challenge. We're up to the tasks, and we are doing it. My last question is this. Is it possible to receive a commitment to help these victims? Is there any way we can show them exactly what the steps are to follow in the process to prove to them that not only do we care about them, but that we are modernizing legislation to help them, because a victim is being created every second, and it's really hard for them to believe that we are there for them. Can you give us a commitment to transparency, and can you tell these young people what the steps are in the process to help them? Yes, of course, we can always communicate better what we are doing, and we have to do that. But as you said, we have to be there for the victims, and we have to be explain to them better exactly what we're doing to help them.
Minister, thank you, Madame Goudreau. We'll turn now to Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Blair. Thank you, Madame Lucky, for coming. Thank you, Minister Lametti. Ferris Antoun, the CEO of MindGeek, lives in Montreal. In fact, he's building his dream home there, apparently quite the mansion, in a neighborhood called Mafiaville. Now, I've been in Montreal a lot, but I don't know where Mafiaville is. But I mention it because he lives in Montreal, as does his partner, David Tassilo. They have 1,000 employees in Montreal, and their office is at 777 Boulevard des Carrés. So, Mr. Lametti, in your opinion, would this qualify MindGeek as a Canadian company subject to Canadian law?
Again, I'm not going to comment on the actual details. There have been differing opinions. As Minister Blair and I have pointed out, it can depend on where servers are located.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. Servers. I'm reading the Mandatory Reporting Act, and it doesn't mention the word servers. It mentions the word service. So I could help you if you look up Wikipedia. The first line in Wikipedia, Mr. Lametti, is that MindGeek is a private Canadian company. So you don't know that it's a private Canadian company. You don't know.
Mr. Angus, as I have said, we have, my role in all of this is to ensure that there is adequate criminal code protections and that they are in place. I have outlined in my opening remarks, Mr. Angus, as I know you were listening carefully, that there are challenges with respect to companies that operate
I get
across
that.
the internet.
I'm referring to this.
We refer all of these. There are legal opinions that have been given, but
okay. I understand that. I only have a few minutes, Mr. Lametti. I'm referring to this briefing note to the Commissioner from December 10th, 2020. To the RCMP Commissioner. Now, it was done in response to the New York Times article. And it says to the RCMP that in 2018, the RCMP met MindGeek and raised the Mandatory Reporting Act, the MRA, and the company indicated that the MRA did not apply as they were not a Canadian company. So when you guys go to talk to companies that you think may have broken Canadian law, but they have other jurisdictions, and they just tell you, well, we're not a Canadian company, is that good enough?
Well, look, I'm not going to answer on the specifics of whatever.
But you are aware of the Mandatory Reporting Act, right? You have read the Mandatory Reporting Act?
I am very aware of the Mandatory Reporting Act, and a company may also be required to report in another country, such as the United States, which then may be required to report back to Canadian
I know,
law
that's
enforcement
interesting
authority.
Because it doesn't say that under the Mandatory Reporting Act.
Those are questions on application.
Mr. Lametti, it says under the Mandatory Reporting Act that if an allegation of child pornography is made, the service provider has to make available to appropriate Canadian law enforcement agency. But you're saying they could interpret that to maybe apply to someone else because they've never made a single mention. They've never reported anything to Canadian authorities. I mention that because Rose Kalemba...
I think it matters of application, Mr. Angus. If you'll allow me to answer your question, Mr. Angus.
I was beginning my question. Sorry, I'm
well,
still
I wanted to just answer that
order members. Statement. Mr. Angus, would you finish your question?
Yeah,
so the minister
I was just beginning my question, Mr. Lametti. Sorry to interrupt. I don't want to be rude. Rose Kalemba gave us horrific testimony by writing. She was 14 when she was kidnapped, tortured, and raped, and the multiple videos of her torture was posted on Pornhub. She begged them to take it down. They wouldn't take it down until over 2 million people had witnessed it. She is a Canadian citizen. These tags were posted by a company that's centered in Montreal. So given your reading of the Mandatory Reporting Act, would it may have saved Rose Kalemba and other victims that we've talked to if there had been a single instance where Pornhub or MindGeek had actually reported the Mandatory Reporting Act, as we have in Canadian law, to Canadian authorities?
Mr. Angus, I will say, as I have said, that the coverage of both the Criminal Code and the Mandatory Reporting Act covers Canadian domestic situations. Other international agreements help with respect to the gathering of that evidence. I won't comment on any past or ongoing or future cases of investigation. That is not in my.
I totally understand. It was just that Ms. Kalemba was Canadian, so I thought that might be able to help us. I'm interested, though, because we talk about the Mandatory Reporting Act, and you're telling us we're going to get this new regulator that's going to come, and it's going to be mandatory as well. But this RCMP briefing note says that the RCMP strives to maintain partnerships with private companies, Pornhub, MindGeek, as these are effective and support the company's voluntary compliance and adherence to its own terms of use. So I've read the laws on child pornography, on the Mandatory Reporting Act. I'm just really surprised that the RCMP and you seem to have this position that you would prefer voluntary compliance with the law when we haven't had a single case of them actually reporting anything. So how does this voluntary compliance work with our partners with MindGeek if they never report anything?
Mr. Angus, your time is up, but we'll turn to the Minister for
Thank
response.
You. Well, I think you should address that question perhaps to the RCMP. I have expressed no position, Mr. Angus, for the record, although you seem to have attributed.
Oh, so you don't have a position that they should or not report? As the Attorney General, you don't have a position. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That is not what I said, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll turn to Mr. Viersen. Mr. Viersen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Lametti, back in November, I and a number of parliamentarians wrote you regarding documented cases of child exploitation, sex trafficking, and rape published on MindGeek's sites. This was monetized and viewed by millions. And we asked you if the current laws were adequate to prevent, on what was preventing the lack of enforcement. And you wrote back, I assure you that the Criminal Code contains a robust framework that prohibits a broad range of the conduct you reference. So here we are 6 months later, multiple victims have come forward, hundreds, if not thousands of examples, and still no charges laid. Are you still confident of our robust framework?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Viersen. I'm very confident of that robust framework. We have domestic coverage, which is more exhaustive, I think, than any other country in the world. This is a complex international situation, and questions about the application of the law should be addressed to the RCMP, for example, as an investigating body. Perhaps Minister Blair would have something to add, but certainly the normative coverage of our laws in Canada are second to none in the world.
Well, No, Mr. Lametti, as the director of the Public Prosecutions Act, the Public Prosecutions Act allows the Attorney General to issue prosecutorial directives. Have you issued any prosecutorial directives in this regard?
Our prosecution service, Mr. Viersen, as you know, is done at arm's length. The times at which I can intervene are structured under the Act and very rare. I am working, obviously, with my counterparts, but I can assure you that law enforcement is first of all working on investigations in an independent manner, and then to the extent that there is enough evidence gathered to proceed with prosecutions, will be part of an independent prosecutorial decision, and I am confident that those agencies are all doing their work as they are supposed to be.
Mr. Lametti, this has been going on for years. We're discussing egregious offenses towards women and children, sex trafficking, child abuse, rape, all published online for years and years. and yet no charges, no investigations. Don't you think maybe now is the time for a prosecutorial directive?
Again, my role in this, Mr. Viersen, as you know, is to ensure that the Criminal Code, Mandatory Reporting Act, and other statutes
so you have no responsibility in
coverage.
At all?
No. And at all, I am confident that all aspects of Canadian law enforcement, prosecution, as well as the Justice Department and public security departments, public safety departments are working hand in hand in order to make sure that this goes well. What I can't do as an elected official is comment on an investigation. What I can't do as the Minister of Justice or as
We're not talking about a particular investigation. We're saying give a prosecutorial directive. Prosecutorial and important. It was established under the Conservative government, previous Conservative government, and I firmly believe that was a very good move by Conservative Justice ministers at the time. Interestingly, MindGeek Pornhub have over 1,000 employees in this country. They operate in this country, regardless of where they are. Do you believe that regardless of where a company is headquartered, they ought to obey Canadian law?
Again, my role in this is to make sure the laws are adequate, whether Canadian laws are being followed or whether Canadian laws apply are going to be part of the investigative and prosecutorial functions.
But for over 9 years, they've failed to comply. We've clear evidence of child sexual exploitation happening on their website, and yet no reporting. Do you think that is a following of the law?
Look, these are horrific crimes. We know that. We have confidence in our police services. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, most of it falls at the provincial level. But to the extent the RCMP is involved, confidence in the RCMP, confidence in the systems that we have put in place to report these crimes, and confident in not only the investigative independence of the RCMP, but also the prosecutorial independence of the prosecution services, not just at the federal level, but at the provincial level and territorial level across Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Viersen. We're going to turn to Ms. Latanzio now. Ms. Latanzio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being present this morning, both ministers and Ms. Lucky. Thank you for partaking and helping this committee move along and undertake this very important study. So my first question will be to Mr. Blair. Mr. Blair, just last month, the Public Safety Canada launched a national awareness campaign targeting children, parents, and caregivers in order to raise awareness of the online child sexual exploitation and abuse. More specifically, raising awareness of this heinous crime, how to report it, and how to reduce the stigma associated with the reporting. What are the awareness and stigma reduction practices so important?
Thank you very much, Madam Latanzio. I think it's a very important question, and we understand that public education for children and for their parents, and awareness of the issue of child sexual exploitation on the internet is absolutely critical in giving families and young people the tools that they need. We also are working hard to remove the stigma because we know many people have been deeply traumatized by this most heinous of crimes, and we want to empower people to be able to come forward and take actions to protect themselves. And at the same time, we also recognize the importance of strong support for criminal investigations. And you know, I want to sort of acknowledge that the RCMP runs the National Child Exploitation Crime Center, but we work very closely with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection that undertakes on our behalf and with our funding support for victim identification and victim support strategies to provide assistance to survivors and tailored resources for victims and their families, because we know the victimization in this most terrible way by this online sexual exploitation of children can have lifelong consequences. And so it's critically important that we raise public awareness of the issue, so that we know even during the pandemic, a lot of kids are spending a lot more time online, and we want to make sure that they can do it safely. And that can be done through public education and working with their families. And at the same time, we also recognize that predators are out there, and we need to make sure that we have the tools and the resources necessary to apprehend, deter, and prosecute those individuals.
Okay, thank you. My question, I'll turn now over to Mr. Lametti. Mr. Lametti, I would like to give you the opportunity to tell the committee more specifically what is the Mandatory Reporting Act. I know that my colleague before has asked you questions, various questions on it, but maybe if you can provide this committee with broad lines as to what exactly this act is and how it can help combat child pornography in Canada.
Thank you very much, Ms. Latanzia, for the question. And indeed, it's opportune to answer, given that it does play an important role in all this. The MRA is a federal criminal statute that places obligations on those who provide internet service to the public. For example, access providers, content providers, hosts, and it requires them to report to the C3P, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Which runs the anonymous tip line cybertip.ca. If they're advised of an internet address where there is child pornography that may be available to the public, or they're required to report to law enforcement if they have reasonable grounds to believe that the internet service is being used to commit a child pornography offense. And that is critically important. It also requires them to maintain the fleeting data for a period of 21 days. Enforcement a chance to access that. So those are important measures in trying to combat a phenomena which is happening quickly online. So it tries to give that mandatory reporting obligation law enforcement authorities through the mandatory reporting obligation some ability to act quickly. So it's a critical part of the criminal structure in fighting this kind of crime. And we all believe it's heinous and needs to be eradicated.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to be going back to Minister Blair. Minister, I'm hoping that you can speak a bit more today about human trafficking. I believe that our government's national strategy focuses also on the empowerment as a pillar in itself. And and that you actually have an advisory committee and a chief advisor. Can you please elaborate for us today on the importance of having a representative working with the government dedicated to fighting the scourge?
Yeah, thank
Minister,
you very
much. The member's time is up, but we'll give you an opportunity for a short answer.
I'll do my best to answer short, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, a special advisor to combat human trafficking has been named, and the purpose is to provide expert advice to the government on our collective efforts to combat human trafficking, to raise awareness about this terrible crime, and it builds on some previous investments, and it's part of a national strategy to combat human trafficking that the government launched in 2019.
Thank you. We're going to turn to Madame Goudreau for 2.5 minutes. Madame Goudreau.
Oui, je vais revenir avec ce que je discutais tantôt, considérant... Bon.
I'll come back to what I was talking about a little earlier. I was saying that the legislative process is very slow, but we need to act quickly. Apart from the way laws are passed in this country, it's clear that we cannot move quickly enough to help the victims. And victims are created every second. So, given how fragile the legislative process is, which means that it can take years before a bill becomes law, don't you think that, given everything going on these days and given the severity of the crimes we're discussing here, is there any way we can increase the accountability for companies or people who could help counter these crimes? It's all very good to invest more money, to create more regulators, but we already have institutions in place. So I'd like to hear you about the speed with which things happen in this country. We have victims on the ground, but lawmakers like us, we're stuck in this system which doesn't move fast enough for the victims. So I'd like to hear you on that. Thank you very much, Madame Gaudreau, for your question. Yes, we are doing what we can by investing money, because this is a power the federal government has. Now, as for legislation, sure, we're always open to improving the legislative process, and be it in the criminal system or elsewhere. As I just said, the criminal code and other laws on the books are robust. Is there room for improvement? Well, we're open to any suggestions. And I know that some MPs have private bills, and some of those bills are in the House of Commons now. And I know that your own leader has presented legislation on medical assistance in dying, and often we all have to work together. Sometimes some political parties engage in filibusters. So we need to all work together, and we on our side are willing to work with the other parties.
Sure, we'll go to Mr. Angus now. Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Lametti, for coming today. So I'm going to move beyond our attempts to get answers on the mandatory reporting laws that we have in place. This story blew up and I think shocked us all when Serena Fleites, who was a child porn survivor, came forward to the New York Times. She begged Pornhub MindGeek to take her videos down. There were multiple tags, she said. When we asked Pornhub MindGeek about this, they had no record. They don't have any records of her. But we had a number of other children survivors come forward. So we have had zero investigations, zero reporting of any of these allegations that have come forward of MindGeek, which I know you're not sure if it's a Canadian company, but it is in Montreal. But under Section 163-3 of the Criminal Code, any person who transmits, makes available, advertises any child pornography is guilty of an indictable offense. That's up to 14 years. So I'm thinking the tags, the promotions, the selling, the online stuff. Do we not already have laws in Canada that are sufficient? We just don't seem to have the political will to actually apply the law. Why would we need to change anything when the law is pretty clear about transmitting, distributing, and advertising of this kind of child rape?
Mr. Angus, allow me to if I may
Sorry,
respond.
I'd asked the question to Mr. Lametti. Is he
Well, I'm
still
happy
with
to
us?
jump in. I'm glad, Mr. Angus, that you have understood that, in fact, Canadian criminal law and the Mandatory Reporting Act provides one of the strongest and most exhaustive frameworks in the world for this kind
exactly.
of
So why have you never had any
crimes.
reporting in Canada? If it's so robust, Mr. Lametti, how come there's been zero reporting?
Out, well, I know you were listening to the opening remarks very carefully, and as I'd said, the principle of domestic territoriality applies, which is the criminal code applies in Canada, and in the internet context, there are a variety of different standards that might mean that a company is actually operating in another country. So we work with other countries.
But
to
you haven't had
exchange
any reporting or
We work with other
investigations,
countries.
Mr. Lametti. Come on.
Again, I can't comment on investigations.
So, but
That's
under
not within
Section
my
163,
mandate.
wouldn't you say that these are prima facie cases, that you do have the authority? You just haven't done it.
I do not have, as I said, the criminal code is more than adequate as it applies to Canadians. It's actually a very good criminal code, and I'm very proud of it. The application, investigations, and prosecutions are independent functions, and their application in an international context is not always as clear as you would have it be, even if that's what we would both like.
Well,
it
would
to
you
be.
say then it would be a safe haven
we-
in Canada, that you could set up shop in Canada and not have to worry that you're going to have to be forced to report because there's been no reports?
That
Your time is up,
certainly
Mr. Angus,
not
but
the
we'll
case,
give.
Mr.
Thank you.
Angus.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to turn now to Mr. Carey, and he'll be splitting his time with Mr. Gord, I believe. Mr. Carey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ministers. Through this study, we've been talking about the privacy and reputations of those who have had their sexual private images uploaded to adult websites without their consent. We've heard from many of these victims, and many of them are children, and they're also victims of sexual violence, human trafficking. With that, Minister Blair, you called these heinous crimes, heinous acts. Do you believe that perpetrators of human trafficking deserve to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Minister Lametti, do you believe perpetrators of human trafficking deserve to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, yes or no?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Lametti, could you please let Canadians know what is the maximum sentence for those convicted of the indictable offense of human trafficking? And what would be the maximum prison sentence for those convicted of a summary offense? Just the numbers, please.
So I don't have those provisions in front of me. I will get back to you with those answers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blair, the cabinet colleague that is testifying with you today sponsored Bill C-75 in 2019, which made human trafficking a hybrid offense, thus making modern-day slave traders able to be convicted and serve less than 2 years prison time, or even just pay a fine of no more than $5,000. Now, Mr. Angus was talking about how robust Canadian system is. Your government actually changed it into a hybrid offense where somebody could get off with the same penalty as basically, causing a public disturbance. Are you aware of those changes in Bill C-75?
Thank you, Mr. Carey. And I am aware of the changes, but I'm also aware that we did not reduce the maximum penalty for the worst offender committing the worst offenses for human trafficking. And so the penalties that were previously available in those most heinous of circumstances allows for the courts, based on the evidence and the law, to make a determination of the appropriate sentence for the circumstances before them.
But when you had the chance to actually change the law, instead of getting tougher and working like Mr. Angus was saying to actually apply the law that we had in this robust framework that you claim to have, made it actually a weaker offense. And it's just, how can these victims actually trust your government to be on this and doing the best for Canadians when you had the opportunity, you actually weakened the law instead of strengthened the law? And with that, Mr. Gord, that's my time, but very disappointing, that's for sure. Mr. Gord.
Monsieur Gord.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question va être...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the Justice Minister. We're all extremely upset about this issue, which is online childhood porn, and we need to strengthen our legislation to better protect victims. However, I have a suggestion for the Minister. If we can strengthen the legislative framework, could we not first get an opinion from the Supreme Court? Because we know that the companies involved have huge resources. They've got a ton of money, and they can hire the best lawyers to fight any laws we want to pass. But if we got an opinion from the Supreme Court, this could help limit companies fighting back, and it might help protect victims faster. What does the minister think of this suggestion? Thank you, Mr. Gould, for your question. So, as I explained several times, Canada's laws are fairly exhaustive and clear. The challenge is the international context. So it's a matter of strengthening the enforcement of the law and to conduct investigations, which are often international in scope. So we're talking collaboration with other countries and other police forces throughout the world. So again, we have the laws. Our laws are clear. are we dealing with a Canadian company or not? Well, often it's hard to answer that question. And it's not necessarily the case that a Canadian tribunal would have the answers, because we've seen, for instance, that a decision from the Supreme Court or any other Canadian court was not enforced in the U.S. in the case of acoustic, for instance. So just having an opinion from the courts is not necessarily the solution. I have another question for the Justice Minister.
We'll turn to Mr. Fergus for the last questions for the second round. Mr. Fergus for 5 minutes. Mr. Fergus, you are still on mute.
Je m'excuse, Monsieur le Président.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for reminding me of that. I'd also like to thank our two witnesses for testifying before the committee. As you've seen, it's a very complex, difficult matter which touches every single MP who has been at these meetings. I just want to raise a few points before I put my questions to both ministers. First, as you've seen, Mr. Lametti, well, you've said that we have strong legislation, robust laws. However, we need to strengthen some other elements, given the fact that this is an international problem. We're talking about cyber crimes here, because MindGeek and Pornhub have done things which are criminal in nature, and they've done so through their servers. Despite the fact that there is a willingness which is nonpartisan, well, the official opposition voted against increasing investment in the RCMP to help that police force fight child porn, online child porn, that is. That being said, I know that all MPs around this table are here in good faith, and they all want to act. Mr. Blair, my question is this: what do you need in terms of resources and also in terms of a better legislative framework to help you prosecute those crimes, taking into account, of course, the fact that the internet is international, it is borderless. So what are the types of tools you need? What are the resources you need to make sure that we can prosecute these people, prosecute these crimes, and do justice for the victims of these crimes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus, for what is a very important question. And as you've already indicated, we do supply funding to the RCMP to run the National Child Exploitation Crime Center, which has a number of significant responsibilities, including the investigation of these predators, to gather the evidence and to bring them to court and prosecute them. It's also has a purpose of identifying and rescuing victims on the international front. And because of the nature of online harms generally, and certainly of this most terrible crime, there is a very significant international component, and that's why the 5 countries ministerial meetings that I have attended for each of the last 3 years, the focus in each of those meetings has been on online child sexual and implementation of principles to guide industry efforts to combat online harms and child sexual exploitation. In addition, we are part of an initiative called the We Protect Global Alliance, which is a movement dedicated to national and global action to end sexual exploitation of children online, it includes like-minded states, NGOs, and civil society organizations. And finally, Mr. Fergus, I would point out that the RCMP actually chairs a group called the Virtual Global Task Force on Child Exploitation. And this is an international law enforcement alliance that is engaged in intelligence sharing and data sharing and dealing with this issue globally. And I think it is a demonstration of both Canada's commitment and the RCMP's global leadership on this critically important issue.
Moi, j'ajouterais seulement, Monsieur Fergus.
Mr. Fergus, I would simply add that we're working with other countries within certain legal frameworks to help exchange information between police forces. And we're talking about cybercrime multilateral conventions. We also have bilateral agreements with countries like the U.S. to facilitate the exchange of information when we have to do so quickly. Mr. Lametti, Mr. Blair, this committee cares about this issue, and so we would suggest changes that might help you do your work in prosecuting these crimes. So my question to you is, what do you need from the committee? What kind of recommendations do you need from this committee to help you in your work and to give you the legal framework you need to do your job?
Your time is up, but we will allow the ministers to respond to the question. Ministers.
Moi, je dirais, comme je viens de...
Well, as I just said, we have a strong domestic context. Our Canadian laws are very robust. What we need to work on is improving international cooperation.
Thank you, ministers. That takes us, pardon me, Minister Blair, did you have a response to that as well?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let me acknowledge the important work of this committee, and we will look forward to their findings and recommendations. I think we all share a common commitment to eliminate the sexual exploitation of children online, and we look forward to the recommendations of this committee to help inform and support that work.
Thank you, ministers. We are now finished the second round of questions. Ministers, you had indicated that you were only available for the first hour. We'd love to have you stay if you could extend, but we respect that you are busy people as well. And so if you're not able to stay, we want to thank you for being here this morning and appreciate your willingness to be here. Colleagues, we'll continue then. Into the third round of questions. We've got Ms. Stubbs to begin the third round of questions. Ms. Stubbs, are you there? Ms. Stubbs, you're still on, you remain on mute. Ms. Stubbs.
Good grief, you would imagine by this time. This is why people don't have any faith in politicians. So apologize to my colleagues for this. This is, you would think a year into this, I would certainly know how to unmute myself. Thanks, Chair. So I have some questions for Commissioner Lucky. I have been looking at the website for the for the various child sexual exploitation units in the RCMP, and also would just note recent reporting by the director of CyberTip, who says in 2020 that his % spike over April, May, and June from youth who had been sexually exploited and reports of people trying to sexually abuse children. I wonder if you can confirm that cases of child sexual exploitation online have increased during the past year. And also, I guess in that context, if you can shed some light on exactly what the support and the resources were that the public safety minister says he offered when he reached out to the RCMP after members of parliament and victims spoke out on this travesty last year.
Thank you so much for that question. COVID-19, since COVID-19 especially, it has had a heightened risk to children as offenders. And they've taken advantage of the fact that children are spending more time online and often unsupervised. And since the onset of the pandemic, the center has seen increased online activity related to online child exploitation, sexual exploitation. So from, excuse me, from March to May 2020, the center has recorded approximately a 36% increase in reports of suspected online child exploitation, attributed in part to the increase in viral media and a tangible increase in self-exploitation cases. So we also anticipate more reporting of child exploitation offenses, both online and offline, when the pandemic-related restrictions are slowly lifted, and then the children will have access to trusted adults once again, and access to their teachers, access to caregivers, community support services. It was largely limited at the onset of the pandemic, and so likely preventing children from reporting abuse to the trusted adults outside of their home, which is such a crucial part. Your question in regards to Minister Blair reaching out to the RCMP, whenever huge, for example, when this came to rise, the increase in child exploitation, we're always having a conversation about the things that we can do to prevent them. So obviously, we're looking at legislation, we're looking at the Mandatory Reporting Act, we spoke about resources, we spoke about technology, we've talked about things within the acts, how can that improve law enforcement? How can we better reach out to law enforcement?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So I'm assuming that you have followed this committee and are well aware of the clear instances of hundreds, if not thousands, of victims of child sexual assault material, rape, human trafficking, non-consensual images. I am confident that you're as disturbed by the victim's testimony as each and every one of us are. So without any specifics whatsoever, can you confirm whether or not there has been, whether or not there is an investigation into MindGeek, and whether or not any charges have been laid?
Thank you for that. My committee is looking for clarity on the investigational status, and generally, unfortunately, we don't comment on whether or not an investigation or an incident is under investigation. And obviously, the main reason is we don't want to compromise investigational steps or crucial evidence. And data is just so, comes and goes so quickly. So we really do try not to compromise that. But what I can say is that specifically in regards to Pornhub or MindGeek, the call for a criminal investigation is under review and any further action that's required. So we've been working with police of jurisdiction in that case. And if there is the necessary information that leads us to launch the investigation will be launched unequivocally. And if that investigation gives us the evidence to lay charges, those charges will be laid. I tell you, there's no more committed people than in law enforcement when it comes to child and sexual exploitation.
So I guess from your answer, I can deduce that no charges have been. But you can understand how deeply disturbing that would be to every single Canadian listening in, given the years during which children and women against their consent have been victimized and re-victimized over and over and over. So can I just ask you really simply, what the hell is going on then? How could it be that undertaking an investigation is under consideration right now and there have been no charges?
Well, investigations such as this are very, they don't happen overnight, and there's always obviously gaps in the information. So what happens is, for example, when we get reporting, we have to make sure that especially when we're talking about child exploitation or sexual exploitation, that those files fall within the age group of a child. So that's one challenge. So often we get several reports, and unfortunately they don't fall within that category. So of course they're put to the side, and there's a whole science behind that, and there's a lot of work that goes into just identifying the images online. It's not an easy science, but it's based on the maturation and it's based on experts that have that training. We also, sorry.
Pardon me, I'll let you finish that thought and then we're going to go to Mr. Dong. Apologize, Commissioner.
Yeah, and we've taken the reports that we have received from Pornhub, MindGeek, and many of those reports fell into that category. And the ones that didn't get brought to the police of jurisdiction immediately, and those are referred to go into further investigation. And as soon as they meet those thresholds, and then the investigation is completely launched, and then the evidence, it takes a while to get through the evidence, of course, and then once we have the evidence to lay the charge will be laid, and then that's when it's made public.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Dong, we'll turn to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Commissioner Lucky, thank you very much for coming to the committee and answering some questions. First thing first, when the story broke, it raised a lot of attention in the public. And I've been getting a lot of questions from my constituents from Don Valley North, asking that if they ever encounter a situation like that or any evidence of child being exploited, what should they do? So I'm hoping that you can tell very quickly a little bit more about the National Child Exploitation Crime Center, and does it provide 24-hour service, or what kind of service, and what any member of the public can do if they sense that there's a crime taking place.
Sorry, thank you for that question. No, I was just trying to take that. Obviously, when people are privy to that information, they need to go to their police of jurisdiction first and foremost. We work with obviously the National Child Exploitation Crime Center, and we have tried to connect that center with industry, because having increases and it increases the education from industry. And so they are mandated to address the online child sexual exploitation. They are available 24/7. They work to try to get voluntary compliance from industry, but they also provide that service as soon as they find things that come to their attention that they can bring to law enforcement. They quickly, most readily bring that to law enforcement. And then we help law enforcement. If it's not our jurisdiction, in our RCMP jurisdiction, we make sure that it is brought to the police of jurisdiction, and we assist in any way that we can.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the industry has to voluntary report. But as you heard earlier, there's been a lot of questions about is the law sufficient in terms of making those requirements to industry, business, and they their responsibility in protecting the kids. So going forward, my recommendation is that as we need to complete the study, if you have any suggestions on how to strengthen the legislation in that aspect, we'd be happy to hear about that. My other question is that I believe that there has been reported that since mid last year, the RCMP has received in excess of 100 reports relate to Pornhub through the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. What process? Obviously, I'm not looking for specifics in investigation. If there's an investigation, what are the process and when RCMP received these reports?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, the report through the National RCMP National Child Exploitation Crime Center, and when they receive those reports, and also we receive reports internationally through the National Crime Center in the United States, and we take those and we ensure that they are referred to a Canadian law enforcement agency. Often we'll put together an investigative package if we can, and we bring that to our agencies, and once they get that, then they can initiate an investigation.
So we heard from a lot of members. There's obviously questions about jurisdictional responsibilities. You know, is this a Canadian company subject to Canadian law? In your opinion, is there anything that we can do to make it more clear that, you know, these investigations can take place? Because obviously we've heard that there's a lot of evidence out there, but there hasn't been a investigation being launched.
Yeah, it's such a complicated issue because, as you know, the application of domestic criminal laws and territorial limits state jurisdiction has been a challenge given the global nature of the internet, which is not bound by the traditional borders. So international conflict law is such a complex matter. And so it's very difficult for the RCMP to monitor and ascertain compliance with the Mandatory Reporting Act, particularly in the cases where the companies have a complex international structure and the data is stored in multiple jurisdictions. Those services flow through the internet and they transcend international borders. But that's where having strong partnerships internationally and with the virtual global task force, that's where the exchange of that intelligence and the exchange of the data takes place. And that's where we can maximize and get, you know, sort of get rid of some of those borders, so to speak, because we have to make sure it falls within our purview.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I did want to give time for the question to be answered. We'll go to Madame Goudreau now for the next 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Don.
Oui, bonjour.
Good morning or good afternoon, Ms. Commissioner. I have a few short questions. Given that there's been an increase in calls for help, over 100,000 actually, given how hard it is to conduct an investigation, can we get a number from you? How many investigations were held in 2019 on anyone who came forward asking for help?
Thank you for that. In 2019, there was 11,376 investigational packages that were sent to law enforcement agencies of jurisdiction within Canada and abroad. In addition, approximately 63,000 reports were forwarded to law enforcement, primarily internationally as investigative leads. There's no real requirement for police of jurisdiction in Canada or for international law enforcement, in fact, to advise the RCMP as to whether or not they commence an investigation or based on the investigative packages that we give them. However, through our partnerships with the NCECC, we're aware that there have been many of the packages have led to successful outcomes.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I have another question. Given that you are restrained sometimes by the law, and given the international context, do you think it would be possible to create a structure or to give more powers to authorities to make sure that this problem, which moves faster than the law does, governments tend to increase budgets, but in your case, do you need more resources, more financial resources? What exactly do you need? Perhaps it's something the committee can put in its recommendations to help you. And do you think some kind of international structure could be put in place to help protect children? Thank you very much for your question.
Obviously, we look at it multiple things. We look at, first of all, legislation. We have the Mandatory Reporting Act, as the Minister Lametti spoke about. We have to look at compliance within that act, and it has to be more inclusive of all the service providers. It would be very helpful, of course, to have basic subscriber information for that, because that would lead to quicker responses and more fulsome responses. Increased resources never hurt, so I would never turn down increased resources. We also have to look at technology, because technology, for instance, I'm not sure if I think earlier you spoke of the Arachnid project, and that's using technology. That's for children, but that we should be using the similar technology for adults as well, something that can scour the internet and can take those images down, multiple images, because even if we hit one service provider like a Facebook or Twitter or Pornhub, that image gets downloaded to other platforms and other platforms, and it grows exponentially. So the only way to get rid of all that is to have technology scan and scour. Obviously, we need mandatory reporting of online harm. We need those steps like the minister spoke about to preserve that evidence, and having that content removed in a timely manner as per what the minister had said. So all of those are very important. In regards to international, we always need to be speaking about international with our international partners. And it's interesting that you say that, because when I talk with the Five Eyes partners, obviously we're talking about national security, we talk about terrorism, but we talk a lot about child exploitation because it's a growing industry. Like one of the statistics that just, shocks me is since the Project Arachnid, which scours the net and takes down images or requests for images to be taken down, as of April 1st of this year, it has sent over 6.9 million requests to platforms for removal. Like that number is incredibly huge.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll turn to Mr. Angus now for the next round of questions. Mr. Angus.
Thank you so much, Madame Lucky, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I'm looking at the briefing note that was given to you on December 10th, I believe, 2020. Subject, New York Times article, The Children of Pornhub. And it's interesting because you talked about strong partnerships, but what really struck me when I was reading is it said, the RCMP strives to maintain partnership with private companies. And in this case, we're talking about Pornhub, MindGeek, as these are effective, and supports the company's voluntary compliance and adherence to its own terms of use. So I'm why, when we're talking about whether or not criminal acts have been committed, that the RCMP is interested in supporting voluntary compliance and the terms of use that are put on the website by the company as opposed to adhering to Canadian law.
I think, thank you so much for that question. I think it's all about a combination, because there's the legal side and there's the regulatory side, which of course, so we don't deal with the regulatory side. But let's face it, if we can get companies to voluntarily comply with the regulations, then we are so much further ahead. And I know that we've been working with the companies, especially through the NCECC. We've been sharing best practices of other companies who also have it, obviously have it right or are doing better. We discuss mechanisms for reporting. We provide the awareness and the education of the Mandatory Reporting Act in the first place, because many of these companies aren't aware of that. So it's a combination of...
Okay, well, thank you. It's just, I guess what was shocking to us at committee was to learn that they'd never actually complied at all or brought forward any under their obligation on the Mandatory Reporting Act. But I bring it up because, and I know you can't deal with specific cases, but I want to talk about a survivor that reached out to us who's an adult survivor of non-consensual abuse, because we've been talking about children. She's had numerous conversations with the RCMP, and she's logged them. And in an April 6th phone call with the RCMP told her that Pornhub can't be charged because they're under a blanket waiver. And the survivor said, "Do you mean their terms of service?" And the RCMP said, "Yes, the terms of service state that they are not liable, and it's the user's responsibility." And this is a survivor of non-consensual sexual assault. I know you can't speak to specifics, but it says that in your briefing notes, the terms of use was identified, and this is what a police officer is telling a survivor as to why they can't bring forward their case. Why is that?
Well, I would never suggest to any law enforcement that a survivor should not be bringing their case forward. They absolutely should be going to their police of jurisdiction, bringing that case forward so it can be properly reviewed and investigated. It's so important. And obviously that reporting is important for the companies, but it's also important for the survivors to come forward so that we can follow the leads and make sure that that is properly investigated.
The problem is the RCMP...
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, your time unfortunately is up. I did want to offer the opportunity for an answer, and so that was an extension on the time. We'll go to Mr. Viersen now for the next round of questions. Mr. Viersen for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the Commissioner for being here today as well. I'll probably stick in the similar vein as Mr. Angus, just around MindGeek appears to have close to 1,000 employees based here in Canada. If I see sexual exploitation here in Canada, regardless of where it originated from, would I not have the duty to report it?
Yes, but MindGeek, the actual company MindGeek, is not all involved with. Pornhub is but one subsidiary, and there's many other subsidiaries to MindGeek. So I'm not sure many of those employees may not even be aware of some of that.
Okay. Less if you're sitting in an office building in Canada and you come across child sexual exploitation, do you not have a duty to report it, regardless of where it originates from?
Yes, any citizen, it just doesn't have employees, but any person in Canada, any person anywhere should be reporting it, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So MindGeek is, or RCMP documents show that they met with MindGeek in 2018, and MindGeek at that point said that they declared that they didn't need to report to Canadian law enforcement because they weren't a Canadian company. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, when we had that discussion with MindGeek back in 2018, they asked for support in relation to actually some automated software to assist in the detection of the online sexual exploitation material. And so the NCECC directed them to a third party so that they could have that type of software. We also, at that time, it was raised about the Mandatory Reporting Act. And at the time, they had said that it doesn't apply to them because they're a Canadian company. But although it doesn't mean that they weren't reporting it, they were actually reporting it through the United States. And then now the United States, well, they give us that information. And we've actually, through MindGeek, have asked them to do a monthly report on what they report to the United States. So it's kind of a non-traditional way that it should be done. But the bottom line is we are getting the reports.
Okay, but this whole piece of jurisdiction still baffles me. Like, why would they not report it to Canada?
They believe that their servers that are applicable to this is they report through the NCMC MEC that operates in the States, which I can't speak to that particular legislation. However, like what I will do is, like, there's Article 2 and there's Article 3 of the Mandatory Reporting Act. I do have my subject matter expert, Mr. Andre Beaulieu, who can give you a more fulsome response on that because he's very more adept on the actual articles that they fall under.
Good day. So MindGeek, as per the way the company is structured, necessarily it is unclear at the moment if that company constitutes to be fully Canadian or not. So the NCCC actually did have some communications both with the NCMEC in the United States and the company. And to prevent duplication of reporting, we actually were able to get those monthly summaries, and it actually helps us to assess the reports that are coming our way, so we can actually move those very quickly.
Commissioner, have you read the letter that over 70 members of Parliament and senators have sent to the RCMP?
Yes, I have, and we do have a response. I will apologize for the delay. It isn't your traditional one-page response. It is over, I think it's almost 7 or 8 pages. And we did have it prepared. It was ready to go last week until we realized that it needed to be translated. So the committee will be getting a response to that letter today. And we might slightly delay it if there's any other outstanding questions as a result of this committee appearance. We'll add those responses to that.
Okay. Mr. Chair?
Yeah, no, you do have about 15 seconds left.
All right, I'll cede my time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn to Ms. Shanahan. Ms. Shanahan, for the next round of questions. You've got 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, puis merci à...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Commissioner, Ms. Lucky, for being with us today. I listened with interest to all the testimony we heard today, and I think it's important to point out, for the sake of Canadians, because this study has generated a lot of public interest. And I think that this helped us a lot in our fight against online child porn and the exploitation of children. So I would like to thank all of our colleagues here today, and especially Mr. Dong and Mr. Erskine-Smith, who brought this motion forward in the first place to this committee.
We have to put our money where our mouth is, right? And that's what all the colleagues here are very concerned about. And so when I heard the ministers and Commissioner Lucky refer to the challenges in enforcement and the resources that requires, and we can understand that the challenge today with technology evolving as it does on a constant basis, the challenge today to identify and investigate child pornography online is tremendous. And so when I see that more than $35 million of funding that was recommended by the government in the supplementary estimates and in the mains was actually voted down by the official opposition. They voted against this additional support to the federal policing. But what's even more shocking to me is that specific allocations that were made in the 2021 main estimates, including $6.3 million for the National Strategy to Combat Human Trafficking, $4.4 million for the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and $4.2 million for protecting children from sexual exploitation online. Exactly what we're talking about here was also the Conservatives, the official opposition, also voted against this. And just by the by, when we're talking about the importance of the RCMP and federal policing in this work, the NDP convention on the weekend had a motion which wanted to defund the RCMP altogether. So I think colleagues can agree.
Recognizing a point of order, Mr. Angus. Mr.
Yeah, I mean,
Angus.
we're talking about child rape here. If she wants to do liberal handstands, she can do it someplace else. We've got a few minutes to get answers whether or not the laws of this nation are being applied. If she's got ridiculous points to make, she can do it elsewhere.
I don't think that's a point of order, but I think in the effort to bring things to order, Madame Shanahan will probably take that note that concern.
And I will get my time back, Chair, because
Ms. Shanahan, you do have about 2 minutes left.
Very good, because I do have important questions for the Commissioner. Because again, I am struck by the challenges, the incredible challenges that we have in the identification and investigation of child pornography in this incredibly complex world, cyberspace world, which in many respects does resemble the wild, wild west. Commissioner, can you comment on the kind of work that you are doing? We heard earlier that the RCMP is chairing the Virtual Global Task Force. Can you comment on that work and what are the initiatives that are being undertaken at this time?
Thank you so much for the question. Although law enforcement is facing a ton of challenges in addressing this crime, we've made some significant progress. In 2019, for example, there was over 100,000 reports that were received, and 362 Canadian victims were identified and uploaded to the Interpol's International Child Sexual Exploitation Database. And that was an increase of 32% from the previous year. We also have developed and implemented a new and efficient file management system, and this is all with the funding that we got in budget 2018 and 1920. And it's specific to online child sexual exploitation as well as investigations, and it's to increase effect and analysis capabilities because that's so important. Like you mentioned, we led a global study related to health and wellness as a part of the partnership with the virtual global task force. I can't understate the negative effect it has on anybody who is in this line of business to view these images day in and day out. So that study was so important. And there's an international police alliance dedicated to the protection of children. As well as, and that's what happens with the chair, with that virtual task force, with the intel sharing and the data sharing. There's a lot of outreach and education. And we also have, going to my list, we work with obviously the national and international partners to help ensure that all citizens are informed as possible, because it's about that reporting and that information sharing. And it's not just about victims or survivors, it's about the people who are privy to that information as well. And so Canadian Centre for Child Protection, C3P we call it, is our national strategy partner, and they've developed numerous resources for children, parents, police officers, and community members so that they are educated. So information is power, and I can't stress that enough, because it's about people see something, you say something, you bring it forward, and that's the best way that we can deal with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll turn to Mr. Carey now. Mr. Carey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the Commissioner. I wanted to kind of explore a point that was mentioned by the ministers, but also yourself in regards to the international front. I was honored to be part of a round table in Oshawa, and I want to thank the Durham Police Human Trafficking Division. And they had representatives from the FBI and from Texas. And what I found out is that if you commit human trafficking and these offenses in the United States, it's a mandatory minimum of 10 years per person trafficked. Now, when the Liberals had a chance to do something about this in 2019, they passed Bill C-75, which actually turned human trafficking into a hybrid offense where somebody could serve less than 2 years in prison or just pay a fine of $5,000. So what I wanted to ask you as a police officer, if you wanted to have a disincentive of doing this type of business in Canada, if I'm a business and I want to use these exploitative images on the internet or human trafficking over the internet, and I could do the business in Canada versus the United States, which is a greater disincentive to do the business in Canada or the United States if you compare 10-year mandatory minimums versus potential $5,000 fine, which from my sources say these human slave traders can make $250,000 to $300,000, excuse me, per person trafficked. What do you think? Where's the better place to do business?
That is, Mr. Carey, a very difficult question, and I would actually pass that to my colleagues from Department of Justice. I think Robert Brookfield and Norman Wong are on the line as well, and they would probably be better suited for answering that question.
Well, maybe you can't answer the question, but I think it's quite obvious to anybody watching this right now that when we had a chance to get tougher on these type of crimes, we actually made the penalties less severe. And you mentioned some statistics in response to my Bloc colleague about how many investigations you've done since 2019 when the Liberals did change this. And you have been quite busy, and I understand that, the numbers, but there were thousands of investigations, but how many charges have you actually laid since 2019, since this Bill C-75 came into effect?
I don't have the specific numbers since the onset of Bill C-75. I would have to get you numbers in regards to the RCMP jurisdiction and not the entire Canada, which would be a disservice because many of the areas that we police are not the center of where a lot of this crime occurs. They tend to gravitate towards the bigger urban centers.
Oh, absolutely. And Mr. Chair, just curious, how much time do I have left?
About 2 minutes.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner Lutke. When you're looking at the situation that we're facing, like I come from Oshawa, and we're along the 401 corridor, and we have seen an increase in business, this type of business, which is upsetting to all of us that have been involved in this study. And I was wondering if you could provide the committee, first of all, the number of charges that have been laid by the RCMP, but if you could mention how many have been in jurisdiction. You know, the government was having challenges appointing judges for a period of time for federal courts. And when the changes were made for human trafficking to be turned into a hybrid offense, it was disappointing to see these indictable offenses that originally carried some significant penalties for people in human trafficking to be pushed down to the provincial courts. Would you be able to tell us, just off the top of your head, how busy are the federal courts right now when they do have to prosecute these type of crimes? Is there a long waiting period between the time charges were laid to the time that victims have to go to court to become re-victimized and testify against the perpetrators?
There's about 30 seconds remaining, but I will allow the commissioner to answer.
I would love to be able to answer that question, but in regards to the delays in the court, obviously COVID has contributed to that, but I can't give you those specific answers. And there is no distinction between the provincial and the federal when it comes to laying of a criminal code charge. It's just brought to court. And obviously, I don't have those specific numbers or the delays.
Well, thank you for your testimony. I look forward to some of those numbers if you can give it to us.
Thank you, Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning again to everyone. Commissioner Lutke, thank you for coming today, and thank you for your comments to date. I had the pleasure of growing up in a small town in British Columbia with an RCMP detachment there in Prince Rupert, and I know during my high school years we were visited by our RCMP officers, and for good things, of course, for educational items and so forth. So I want to thank all the RCMP officers here in Ontario. Many people may not see the RCMP officers on a daily basis, but growing up, we certainly did. Thank you to them. In regards to the response that was given, the letter dated February 22nd, 2021. It was a response actually to my colleague, Mr. Dong's question in terms of whether Mr. Stephen White, that response, that 3-page letter, which I found to be very, very insightful, very informative, and gave an excellent summary of the RCMP's responsibilities with regards to this area of jurisdiction we were looking at in terms of the study. I do want to go to in terms of how the committee's recommendations, and because we'll have to write a report and provide recommendations on page 3, with regards to the RCMP's ask and recommendations to improving the law, where if I can just read it, it's the second paragraph on that page. Some of the RCMP's proposed recommendations, including the amendment to the MRA regulations to name the NCE for notifications with respect to Section 3, duty to notify. This change would better align the reporting activity and make standardization possible. The RCMP understands that the requested change, among others, are now being reviewed by the DOJ. Can you go into and elaborate how that change would strengthen the RCMP's ability to prosecute, investigate instances of child exploitation?
That is a really great question. I'm going to pass that over to my colleague, Andre Beaulieu.
Jay, to answer your question, actually, it would strengthen. It would strengthen because at the moment, if you look at the MRA under Section 3, Canadian companies actually do their reporting to law enforcement across the country, police officers. There is no specific to whom in particular, they can actually do their reporting, contrary to Section 2, where it is very specific because C3P has been identified as the entity to which the reporting needs to be done. So by naming the NCCC in Section 3, this would actually allow it to concentrate all the information towards us, all the reporting, and we'd be able to actually take care of duplication or deconfliction and be able to disseminate the information very quickly across the country to the police of jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. I'm sure I'm going to be reading the blues on your answer there to understand everything, because I'm not a lawyer by training, so but I thank you for that explanation. Secondly, the RCMP the NCECC, on behalf of the RCMP, is the current chair of the Virtual Global Tax Task Force. Very bluntly, how important is Canada's leadership on this Virtual Global Task Force?
Another great question. I can't overstate the importance of the leadership of the RCMP in general in many ways. We're sort of the glue that connects all the police agencies together. We are sort of the national repository for intelligence. And so for us to share that information or be the lead of that, it speaks volumes also to the fact that much of our legislation is ahead of many countries. So that's part and parcel as to why it is important that we lead that global task force. And so it helps in many fronts, not just domestically, but it does help. And obviously it's a great forum to share best practices and to learn what other countries are doing to combat it. But it's also really good to share the intelligence and to do the data sharing as well. So I'm just so honored that Canada is the lead of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, how long do I have left?
You have about 20 seconds left.
Oh, well, with that, I just wish to say thank you to the Commissioner and to Mr. Beaulieu. Excuse me if I don't have your title offhand, but thank you for your answers, and I wish everyone great work. And to the folks at the NCECC, thank you for what you do. I know we've only gotten a very small taste or portion of what child exploitation is about, and I know it turned my stomach, and I went home to my young daughters and gave them a big hug when that day was over. So what they do, I wanted to say thank you to those individuals and for their professionalism and dedication to service.
I'll be sure to pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabero. We've got two final questioners, Madame Goudreau, for the next 2.5 minutes.
Yes, Ms. Lucky. I'd like to have a little more information on the Five Eyes. We heard that Canada likes to position itself as a leader, but aside from our legislative model, if we want to react faster, and you were saying earlier that it's always good to get more resources. So I'm just wondering who is a member of the Five Eyes group, and what can they tell victims to reassure them, since Canada right now is looking at perhaps helping to create an international framework. And if Canada is to be a leader, tell us more about what the Five Eyes is doing.
Thank you so much for that. Obviously, for the Five Eyes, the countries that are involved are Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the United States, and ourselves. And so it's important that that we work together. First of all, exchange the intel and exchange the data, but also to work towards developing or investing in technological solutions. And so often some of these countries are working towards technological solutions. And so if we can use that, we're also the lead when you look at the child exploitation and you look at the technology there is the first of its kind. And what they've done with the Phoenix Group, it's so incredible. We also look at when we look at companies We like to work with the voluntary principle to counter the online sexual child exploitation and abuse, which were developed by Five Eyes governments through consultation with a wide range of stakeholders, including a leading group of industry representatives. And these principles are intended to provide a consistent and a high-level framework for industry actors to review safety processes and respond to risks facing users. So there's lots of great exchange, all with the goal to to eliminate these heinous acts.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've got
ça perdure dans le temps. C'est toujours le même groupe.
Turn to Mr. Angus as our final questioner this morning.
Well, thank you so much,
Mr. Angus.
Thank you so much, Madame Lucky. In the briefing report to the Commissioner, there are recommendations, but there's nothing there. I thought maybe they were blanked out, but after hearing from the Justice Minister and your testimony, maybe there aren't recommendations. Would you provide whatever recommendations you received in that briefing note to our committee?
I'm looking at
our version is blanked out. If you could just forward that to us, it would help us in our work.
Some of the recommendations.
Yeah.
Well, some of them obviously are cabinet confidence because they're in the midst of an MC, but obviously we're looking at we're having discussions with the DOJ about the Mandatory Reporting Act.
Okay,
how to strengthen that.
I have very little time. I'm just asking if you could forward them to us. It would make things simpler.
Yeah, we can put in a little section in that
Thank you
letter.
so much for that. And I'm lucky, we hear time and time again from survivors that they're not believed. And I just want to put this on the record because we've heard about how, when you spoke with Pornhub in 2018, Pornhub believed that the rules didn't apply. Then they were going to be allowed to do this in a roundabout way, which I don't see in the criminal code, that we let companies under investigation do things in a roundabout way. But I'm dealing with a survivor who calls the RCMP about non-consensual a sexual assault video. And they said, well, Pornhub, how does Pornhub know that that was illegal? That's what they say to her on April 6th. On May 23rd, they said, well, there's lots of rapes on that site, and some of them are acting. So how is Pornhub supposed to know that this survivor isn't acting? How could she prove that she did not consent? Then the RCMP said to her, well, how can she proved that Pornhub did it on purpose, meaning posting something that's illegal. Then they asked her, well, how did they know that Pornhub knew what was being uploaded? How did she know that they'd even had a chance to view it in advance? And then the RCMP says, yes, but on W5, they said there weren't enough moderators to do the job properly, so they might not have known that it was not consensual because they didn't have enough people to moderate it. So these are the questions that are being asked of a survivor time and time again. And on April 6th, the RCMP writes to her and says, if you have a complaint regarding Pornhub's actions, you need to contact the police where Pornhub is located. So the RCMP is her provincial police. She's told that Pornhub is not a Canadian company. So can you tell this survivor where she has to go to make a complaint about Pornhub?
The re-victimization of survivors is totally unacceptable. It is not acceptable in any means. And I really, the victims of the online child exploitation, they really should reach out to their local law enforcement agency to file the complaint.
She did.
And that's, and it's unfortunate. I have no words to say.
But do you know where she could make her complaint? The RCMP told her she has to contact the police where Pornhub is located. Pornhub's terms of reference says Cyprus.
That's not an acceptable answer, and we need to get better. We need to get better, and when we have the cyber tip line as well, and so we need to get better so that the survivors are not re-victimized every time they have to come forward. And it just saddens me when I hear that. It's just not acceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you to all of the supporting officials that came as well for this afternoon's meeting. I am here in Alberta, so I keep saying that in the afternoon. So anyway, thank you for being here. Colleagues, we will just suspend for a short period of time to allow for the first 2 hours witnesses to log off, and we'll allow the clerk, the law clerk to
point of order, Chair.
Point of order, recognizing point of order. Mr. Dong.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually a point of a clarification. I receive a lot of correspondence from organizations across the country who are concerned that we this when I first put notice forward originally to start this study. I didn't expect the amount of information and evidence that we're getting, and that I know that my colleague, a Liberal colleague, has proposed to hear from the sex workers or sex work advocacy group like Stella, and they've openly said that they want to be here, but they were denied the opportunity. Can you give us an update on how many the remainder of the witnesses and exactly why that we were opposing for Stella to come forward to testify?
Thank you, Mr. Dong. The committee has not yet determined future witnesses, and so the committee will certainly look at the witnesses at a point in which we, as a committee, will make those determinations. That will be something that I will be asking committee members to make some decisions on in terms of how long the opportunity will remain open for witnesses or individuals who believe that they can have something to contribute to this study. We as a committee, I guess, need to give some clarification to people that are watching our study progress. And so at some point when we have a future business opportunity, I think we'll consider all of those witnesses. I would remind every person who believes that they have something to contribute to this hearing that while committee members may not agree to hear from every witness that believes that they have something to contribute, that this committee has made a determination that we will accept all correspondence from people who believe that they have something to contribute to this hearing, and it will be considered to be testimony. So that was a decision of committee members some time ago, and so while not every person who believes that they have something to contribute will be heard in the way that this committee meeting was held today, the committee has made a decision that we will accept all testimony via written form that will be the same way that if those witnesses would testify in person. And so the same provisions of confidentiality, if that is requested, or in terms of parliamentary privilege, those things will be included. And so that was a decision of committee members some time ago. And so we will, I'm certain, have an opportunity to hear from additional witnesses. I'm not sure that anybody, I've not heard down, Mr. Dong. So if committee members make that determination at some future time, then that will be conveyed. But as of yet, I haven't heard of any witness that has had their brief or their requested rejected. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so because that will help us to have a comprehensive study and that's a very important aspect. And I think it will be beneficial for the committee members to hear from.
Sorry,
point
of order.
Point of order.
Mr. Angus, and then we'll turn to Mr. Shanahan.
Thank you. Just in terms of how things are done, we did have a meeting in terms of normally we don't discuss witnesses in public. We discuss it at the planning meeting and then bring forward, and so that was what was done, and that was also understood that all witness testimony is being brought forward even in written form. So we could have a planning meeting, and I'm certainly open to that. I think it's probably a better way to deal with it than points of order on the floor, as Mr. Dong seems to love his points of order.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, and I do appreciate that. I think that there is an opportunity on Friday where we'll be able to schedule one of those meetings. Ms. Shanahan.
Yes, Chair. Just a point of order about our proceedings from here on in, because we received the the briefing about the law clerk's appearance just shortly before this meeting. So I've been trying to communicate with the clerk, and the question is, are we proceeding to the hearing the law clerk? Will it be the normal rounds? That's what I'm asking for clarification on.
For sure, we will start the rounds from the top. It is a new witness, so I do consider this a new witness on a different subject material. We'll start the rounds from the top. The law clerk has prepared an brief opening statement, and so we'll hear from him, and then we will proceed to those. So, colleagues, if there's still a desire to suspend for a few minutes, we can do that, and then we can proceed to hearing from the law clerk. We'll suspend for the next 4 minutes. Meeting suspended. we are moving now back to a discussion with regards to our study with regards to questions of conflict of interest in lobbying in relation to pandemic spending, but specifically with regards to the order reference of March 25th, 2021, and the motion that was adopted by the House of Commons. And so there was some questions with regards to how to proceed. And of course, Monsieur Fortin had brought forward a motion, and it was a desire of the committee members of all parties to hear from our law clerk to provide some additional clarification and some support in terms of decisions that this committee is prepared to make. Monsieur Dufresne, thanks so much for being with us today. We appreciate your willingness to come on such short notice, and thank you so much for providing your insight and wisdom with regards to this matter. I believe that you have an opening statement, a short statement. We'll turn to you for the statement, and then we'll have some questions for you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you for having invited me to testify today. As the House of Commons Senior Legal Advisor, I'm happy to be here today to answer any questions you might have. My office provides a full range of legislative and legal services to the House, its members, and House staff. As the senior legal advisors for the House, we know what the needs are of the House and its members, so we provide these legal and legislative services similar to what the Department of Justice provides to the government. With me is my colleague Michel Bédard, and I hope that our answers will answer your questions.
Persons. The House has certain powers that are essential to its work and part of its collective privileges. As the grand inquest of the nation, the House has the right to institute inquiries, and this right is part of the House's privileges, immunities, and powers, which are rooted in the preamble in Section 18 of the Constitution Act 1867 and Section 4 of the Parliament of Canada Act. These rights and this role have been recognized by courts and include the constitutional power to send for persons, documents, and records. Si un témoin ne se conforme pas à l'ordonnance d'un comité,
if a witness does not abide by an order to appear, the committee cannot impose sanctions, but the committee can accept the situation and the reasons given, decide to do nothing, or report to the House. And the House has the power to take the appropriate measures. With that, I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. I appreciate your willingness to be here. We'll begin the rounds of questions with Mr. Barrett beginning for the opening questions.
Mr. Dufresne, thank you for joining us today. What obligations come with an order of the House?
Well, the orders of the House House's powers, and part of its powers are to send for persons and records. And so the House order is there and ought to be followed.
Resource is available to the House should an order duly issued by the House be disobeyed.
House order falls under the House's privileges and the management of the House's procedural matters. And so in a situation where there is a concern with compliance with a House order, the process to raise those concerns, if it's a House order, would be raising it with the House itself. If there's a concern with a committee order, the matter would first be raised with the committee, but concerns would ultimately need to be raised with the House if additional steps were desired.
In this specific case, sir, an order of the House being issued for persons to appear at committee and documents to be presented or delivered to committee. What's the process that needs to be followed? Does it first need to be referred by the committee chair to the House, or as it is an order of the House, can the issue simply be raised by a member to the Speaker directly?
Well, Normally, the speakers have indicated in rulings that if a matter relates to a committee and relates to information that is to be provided to a committee, it would generally be the practice to wait for the committee to first address it, giving the opportunity to the committee to determine, is it satisfied? Often when information is not provided, there are reasons given for why it's not provided. There are claims of confidentiality made. So the committee is usually first given the opportunity to turn its mind to that and determine if it is satisfied or not, or if it wishes to consider different approaches, or if it wishes to have the matter considered by the House.
And what precedent is there for an order of the House like this one being disregarded or disobeyed?
There have been instances where orders of the House have not been followed in terms of provision of information, situations where government was invoking cabinet confidence so as to not provide information, documents, or invoking national security. And so in these instances, the question was ultimately referred back to the House as a question of privilege. In one instance, being the Afghan detainee matter, the Speaker, in a ruling of privilege, gave some time to the parties to find a solution to resolve the matter, to allow the committee to do its work, but at the same time protect the imperatives that were being raised by the government, in that case, national security. And in another dealing with information about public spending, the matter was referred to the committee, House Committee on House Affairs, so that it could consider it and make a report to the House.
Now, did both of those instances deal with documents, or did one of the two deal with individuals being ordered to testify?
Those two matters dealt with documents.
Okay, so is there precedent with respect to an individual?
There are precedents with respect to individuals being summoned, orders of committees asking for appearances of witnesses, and these being raised with the House.
Now, is there precedent for ministers ordering witnesses not to appear or to disregard an order of the House?
There was a precedent in 2010 where the government instructed its political staffers not to appear in front of a committee. I believe it was this committee, and the argument made then was similar to the argument made now, namely that this was as a matter of responsible government, that the ministers were the more appropriate witnesses to respond to questions from the committee. In that instance, in 2010, there was no order of the House; it was an order of the committee, but the claim made and the grounds given was the same.
How much time do I have, Chair?
You have a minute and a half, one and a half minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Dufresne, in this particular order of the House, was there a provision for ministerial accountability included in the order?
There was a provision in the order that indicated, that gave an alternative that the Prime Minister could appear. If I read the order correctly, that should the Prime Minister instead appear, then the named political staffers, employees would be released.
Right, and so that would satisfy the argument made with respect to ministerial accountability.
Well, that's a determination to be made by the committee and ultimately the House.
Okay, and in the case of individuals being ordered to appear, is there anyone that can lawfully exempt an individual from appearing at committee by order of the House? In this case, ministers of the government telling people lawfully ordered to appear that they not appear. Is that power one that the government has?
Well, in my view, this power rests with the House. The House issues the order, and it's up to the House to interpret whether it is satisfied with compliance with its order. And it's the same with a committee's order, where the committee is given the opportunity to consider. There have been, again, in the precedent of the Afghan detainee, statements from the Speaker very clearly to that effect, that the House has as a constitutional power to request this information. At the same time, very strong encouragement to the House and committees to consider public policy imperatives when exercising those powers.
So your time is up, but we'll turn to Ms. Latanzio. Ms. Latanzio, we'll turn to you for the next 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne and Mr. Bédard, for being present today and answering these questions on, ministerial responsibility. The principles of ministerial accountability guide the ministers and their officials when they appear before parliamentary committees, including when officials appear in their capacity as accounting officers. I understand that ministers are responsible for providing answers to Parliament on questions regarding the government's policies, programs, and activities, and for providing as much information as possible about the use of their powers, including those delegated by them to others. Ministers are also responsible for deciding which questions they should answer personally and which questions may be answered by officials speaking on their behalf. This has been a long-standing practice of the House. Beyond the broad scope that committees can compel anyone residing in Canada to appear before a committee, do you think that using the committee's power to compel staff who have, in many cases, no authority over decisions of the government be forced to appear for only political gamemanship?
Well, I think what I would point to the recognition in procedure and practice, where there's a discussion about the role of public servants and their particular function, and indeed that they are not the ones who are making the policy decisions. That is being made by the ministry and by the minister. So there is a discussion there about the types of questions and the questions and topics that are appropriate or not for public servants, and that generally committees will accept reasons given by public servants, and if there are areas where it's beyond the public servants' authority or knowledge. And so that's where you've seen these types of concerns very much in terms of areas, topics that would be appropriate or not for public servants, given their very different role in terms of decision making and also in terms of the accountability.
You spoke earlier about the precedent that was set in 2010. So I understand that then Conservative Minister Jay Hill made it clear that political staff would not appear before committees. As he stated, these, and I quote, these employees are accountable to their superiors and ultimately to their minister for the proper and competent execution of their duties. And he followed with, there is a clear case to be made that accountability of political staff ought to be satisfied through ministers. Ministers ran for office and accepted the role and responsibility of being a minister. Staff did not. I know you may find it hard to answer, but do you find it somewhat hypocritical that now the Conservatives or other members of this committee are arguing the opposite when it suits them politically? And also, can you also tell us what happened in 2010? Who ended up showing at the committee to testify?
Well, in terms of the 2010 precedent, it was the ministers who appeared, and instead of the political staffer, and the opposition many members of the committee were concerned with that position being taken. There was a debate on a motion to report that to the House, and that was defeated at committee. So that motion was not adopted. And so these are the types of issues that we see arising, and a government will take a position, and committees will consider that and whether they accept the reasons or not given by the government in those instances. And my view is ultimately it is up to the committees and to the House to make the determination. The determination may well be that it's appropriate to have a different witness for a different purposes or different types of information. These are considerations for the committee.
I want to follow up on that because you're highlighting for various purposes or reasons, and that's basically the crux of the question here, for various reasons. And so if there is no value to compelling a witness to come before a committee and it is purely political, would you not conclude then that it would be futile to proceed in the way that this has proceeded?
Well, I think as highlighted in the book in terms of the powers of committees, the issue is always, do you have what you need to fulfill your fundamental mission as the grand inquest of the nation? And are you doing that, exercising those powers in a way that is not harming other public interest, public policy issues, or individuals? So it's really a case-by-case situation as to what do you need, committee, to do your work? What information do you need to be able to fulfill those functions of legislating, deliberating, holding the government to account?
Okay, and I'm going to finish off with another quote by Mr. Hill when he said, and I quote, "The tyranny of the opposition majority has turned its attention to the men and women who make up our political staff, men and women who did not sign up to be tried by a committee, to be humiliated and intimidated by members of parliament." Mr. Dufresne, do you believe that dragging political staff before a committee is likely to benefit Parliament and the government of the day in general? For questions that are not relevant, I'm going to preface to say that.
Right. Well, I think at the end of the day, it's not for me to make the determination of what is needed or not in terms of a committee's mandate. But what I will point to again is the discussion in Procedure and Practice about the particular role of public servants, political staffers, being a different role than the one of ministers. And so the general advice given to the committee really is to seek the information that you need, but treat all witnesses with courtesy and ensure that there's no unnecessary harm that's caused to any individual or any public policy consideration.
Thank you so much. We'll turn to Monsieur Fortin. Monsieur Fortin for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur Dufresne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr. Dufresne. Thank you for being here. As often, your knowledge helps us in our work. Mr. Dufresne, as far as I understand, an authority which emits an order, in this case the House of Commons, is the only body able to withdraw the order or to change it. Is that correct? You're right. You're right, Mr. Fortin. If the wording of the order were to be changed, only the House could do it. However, the order gives the committee the opportunity to release witnesses. So there is a certain discretion in the hands of the committee. Otherwise, it's the wording of the order of March 25th that applies. Yes, that's the distinction between a committee order, which the committee itself could change. In 2010, are you saying that the government ordered a person to disobey an order by the House? Well, in 2010, it actually was a committee order. But an order of the House, it's never happened, to your knowledge? Well, with regard to the appearance of a witness, again, as far as I know, we've never seen that kind of situation. We have with regard to the disclosure of information when documents were requested and the government actually invoked cabinet confidence or national security. But the distinction in this case is that the government is saying that it is the one which is ultimately responsible. Let's talk about ministerial responsibility. I understand that ministerial responsibility means that ministers are responsible before the House and before all Canadians at the end of the day. And they are also responsible how they run their departments. That being said, am I to understand that ministers are the only ones responsible and that the House therefore could not ask for anyone else to be accountable but the minister? And B, am I also correct to assume that a committee could not review with other witnesses or documents the position taken by the minister? Well, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Fortin, Committees have an authority, but the House has the ultimate authority to decide on the reasons. I'm sorry, I didn't express myself clearly. I don't like interrupting. It's impolite, but we don't have a lot of time. So let me try again. Because a minister has ministerial responsibility, so the minister says something, ABC, this is my position. And because of this ministerial responsibility principle, does it prevent committees to call on other witnesses to say, to ask other witnesses whether a minister is right or wrong in a certain position? Are we allowed to do that? Well, based on Speaker Milliken's decision in the Afghan detainee situation, the House is the ultimate master, and the House can decide on the government's position. The government was invoking national security to not present certain documents. But we want to look into a specific issue. Let's not beat around the bush. We're talking about We Charity here, and we want to hear from some witnesses, because the witnesses we've heard have said that those people have told us something. We're not going to point fingers. We simply want to hear their version of the facts, the people we want to call. Doesn't the committee have the right to double-check on what was said, what the first witnesses have claimed they were told? Well, there is no such immunity, actually. No one has immunity from appearing before the committee. So you've been given a reason explaining why certain witnesses will not be allowed to come before the committee. And the reasons are the principle of ministerial responsibility. Now it's up to the committee to take a position on that. Ultimately, it can be up to the House. But am I to understand that we have the right to ask questions of witnesses, even if they are political staff? You have the right to make that request. You have the right to ask these people to appear before the committee. And ultimately, it's up to the House to decide whether the committee has that right or not. But when the boss of these witnesses, these potential witnesses, like a minister, tells his staff, do not obey the order of the committee, are there any sanctions? Can the House impose sanctions or penalties? When there is a concern raised with the House with regard to the production of people or documents, if that issue is referred to the House, and if a committee feels there is a breach of privilege, the matter may end up before a committee, which might decide to amend the order. And if the issue is escalated, a witness might be called to the bar of the House. Somebody might be declared to be in contempt of Parliament. And this was actually done in 2011. But in this case here,
we'll get back to you. Mr. Angus, we'll turn to you. Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you. It's I'm very honored and pleased that you're with us today. For me, having sat at this committee for so many years, it's almost bizarre to watch the Liberals now taking the position of Jay Hill, and I remember my good friend Wayne Easter, who was outraged that they did not want political staffers coming to this committee. Now it's something that's, it would be a fundamental threat to democracy if we did have them come. But I'd like to just put it in perspective of the times. You spoke about the Afghan detainees documents. Canada was in a very messy war. There were allegations of torture. There were international implications. These documents were extremely explosive. And I disagreed with the Conservatives at the time about how they were handling the Afghan detainee documents, but we understood that that was a hugely sensitive issue that it could have massive ramifications. In this case, we're dealing with the Wee brothers and the fact that they called the Prime Minister's office 3 days before it went to Cabinet about $500 million being given to them. And we're not allowed to talk to the key person in the Prime Minister's office who was giving them the thumbs up on that because it's somehow a threat to national security. I think it's just worth putting that into perspective. So I'd like to ask you, I remember when the opposition called the staffer for Christian Parody to testify. The Conservatives weren't very happy. Is it a parliamentary rule that the political staffers, people close to the Prime Minister, can't testify before a committee? Is that some kind of fundamental rule of democracy?
As I've indicated in previous discussion, there's no immunity for political staffers or public servants vis-a-vis a request to testify in front of a parliamentary committee. Generally, how we've seen this dealt with has had to do with the topics and the types of questions, given the very different role that public servants and political staffers have as opposed to ministers.
Yeah, so they have different roles, but they're also the key people who are moving files forward, particularly apparently politically explosive and sensitive files like the Wee brothers' relationship to the Prime Minister and the $500 million they were about to get. So I'm just going to put that aside for a minute now in terms of what our committee needs to do, because we heard a lot about ministerial responsibility from my Liberal colleagues, but the ministers that they brought forward didn't know anything about the file, so it was pretty much a waste of our time. So now we have a motion to report it back to the House. Is there anything outrageous, a threat to democracy, a threat to the survivability of this Parliament, if the committee reports to the House that the witnesses that the House said to come to this committee did not appear, that we report back and say these witnesses did not appear? Is that something that you think causes an election?
Well, it's one of the options that the committee has in a situation where it feels that a witness that the committee wishes to have before it is not before it. And so the committee in that situation has options to say it can accept the situation, it could look for other ways to get the information. But if it wishes to have this particular witness, and then the committee doesn't have the power to enforce that itself, its option is to report the situation to the House.
Okay, I mean, I think in the situation with the Kielburger and the Wee scandal is that we've been 8 months on this. We were finalizing this. There were some outstanding questions. This is why we asked these staffers, but I think we know what we need to know. But I think it would look very strange if we don't put in our report that the last 3 witnesses did not appear. So to me, it's a straightforward issue of the committee was supposed to hear from these witnesses. This was called through Parliament. Parliament named them. They named when they were supposed to appear. They did not appear. That then we simply report back to the House that they did not appear. Is that rather a straightforward function of what the committee's powers are?
Well, it's as indicated, it's certainly something that the committee can do, is to report the situation to the House, and then the matter becomes one for the House to consider what to do in the face of that report.
So then would that be the Speaker who decides? If we simply say we want the House to be aware that following the vote that was taken, they did not appear, we want to make the House aware that is something then the Speaker decides what he's going to do with?
That becomes something that can be raised as a point of privilege. And if it's raised as a point of privilege, then the Speaker would need to rule on that.
Okay. So someone would have to then rise in the House and say that their privilege was abused as an MP, and then the Speaker rules. The Speaker does not need to the Speaker can send it to committee. The
Speaker, when a question of privilege is raised, the Speaker will rule whether this is a valid question of privilege, whether it's raised at the earliest opportunity, whether it raises a prima facie case. And if the Speaker finds such a prima facie case of privilege, then a motion can be put forward. And it's that motion then that would put to the House the remedy, whether it's sending it to proc, which is the normal course, or other mechanisms. In other cases, there was in the Afghan detainee case, there was an invitation given to parties to find a solution. In other cases, there were findings of contempt. In other, the opposition taken to raise concerns with confidence.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. It helps clarify for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carey, we'll turn to you now for the next questions. Mr. Carey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Mr. Dufresne for being here. I do want to go back to the 2010 precedent. And I think you've been clear that it is different. At that time, it was a committee order versus a House order. But I was here at that time, and like what Mr. Angus said, it was a very serious situation. And anybody watching that video, and I would like to refer Ms. Latanzio, when those witnesses, those staffers were brought to committee, they weren't just asked to be there for one day to fill in information that the opposition didn't have. They were actually berated, and it was almost to a point of character assassination. When she talks about political reasons, Mr. Chair, I would say that the Liberals, when they were in opposition, there seems to be a different standard now. And I would like to quote Mr. Easter, who was there at the time. He said, if we want to invite the minister to come before committee, then we'll do so. And we'll expect him to be here. We invite other people to come before the committee, as is our right. We expect them to be here and not to be shut out from coming by an edict from the Prime Minister's office. So, Ms. Latanzio, if I can quote her, and I actually agree, she said, if the questions were not relevant, well, we are asking relevant questions, and we do need those answers to fully complete our report. So, Mr. Dufresne, would you clarify, am I being clear in your your explanation to us that the committee order in 2010 is different than a House order this year?
Well, a committee order is different from a House order in the sense that, as I've indicated, a committee order can be modified by the committee itself. House order cannot be modified by the committee itself. A committee order, when there are concerns raised with it and it is reported to the House, sometimes the outcome is that it becomes a House order. So in this instance, you are have House order. But I am flagging that there were similarities in terms of the argument being raised by the government in that case, as it is now, and also some of the reactions in the committee, including my predecessor appearing in that committee and talking about similar issues that we're discussing now.
Thank you for that clarification. I have been asked by media about the term contempt and contemptuous behavior of the government. In this motion, it's not just our committee, as you're aware. It talks about national defense as well, and the horrific sexual allegations that seem to have been ignored by the Prime Minister's office, the Minister of Defense, right before an election, conveniently, did not want to bring that forward. Could you please help committee members understand the definition, as you understand it, of contempt and contempt of Parliament?
Well, usually when the notion of contempt of Parliament, it's in instances when committees or the House found that certain actions taken were preventing the House from doing its work. We're preventing the members, we're preventing information being provided. Cases of contempt found, for instance, in the instance of someone found to have deliberately misled a committee. So these are the types of concerns that we see addressed in that rubric.
That I'm assuming that you saw the testimony of Minister Rodriguez when he was in front of our committee and was asked very clear questions. And one question, it was frankly I found embarrassing for him. Mr. Polyev, is when he said, what is your response? And he went from one response to another response to he didn't know the response. Obviously, the government has sent in substitution of the actual witnesses, which we could be very clear. We just want the gaps filled in. They sent a minister that had no idea what he was talking about and actually gave opposing answers to the same question he was given by the member of parliament. And when somebody gives an answer that is the exact opposite of what they've stated previously, is that something that you find contemptuous by your understanding of the definition, or
I think this is really something that is for the committee to consider in terms of whether it's satisfied with the information that it has received. It's not for me to make that determination.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Kerry. Your time is up. We'll go to Mr. Dong. Mr. Dong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank the clerk for coming to the committee and help us out on this issue. You talked about the former clerk, Rob Walsh, testifying in 2010 at this very committee and on similar issues. And I quote that he said, but there would be limitations on questions that could be asked. There will be some questions that should properly be directed to the minister and not to the political staff person. Do you agree with Mr. Walsh's opinion, and could you expand on what questions would be off limit to ask the staff?
Well, I think that the point being made by Mr. Walsh is similar to point being made in the procedure. All of the individual is relevant, and the authority or lack thereof. And so generally there is an indication in terms of the role of public servants should not be asked to take political accountability for the decisions that are ultimately made by the government or by cabinet. And so these types of things in terms of defending the policy basis may not be appropriate in terms of having a public servant do that. Public servant would be there for other purposes. So I think it's that really having in mind what is the role and function, and the accountability should guide the types of topics that are raised.
In this case, public servant would include political staff.
Public servant is distinct from political staff in the sense that the public servant is removed completely from the political arena. The political staff is recognized as having or being entitled to have political affiliations with the ministers. So there is a distinction in that sense in terms of the non-partisanship or neutrality, but there is nonetheless certainly a difference between the political staff and the minister in terms of the authority and the accountability.
I'm actually glad that we're talking about this because, in my opinion, ministers' political staff are tasked by ministers with understanding the various implications of options and present to them for decision making. And some staff serve as political advisors, advising on different impacts on political options presented to the minister. Some serve communication staff working to help the minister to effectively communicate the decision they've taken. However, in the end, these staff, they're just staff, and they're advisors. You know, they provide advice, but they don't make the decision. So that's why that in the end, the ministers are ultimately responsible for the decision they make. Do you believe this model of ministerial responsibility is a good one and should be followed?
Well, I can say that the responsible government is based on that it's the ministers and the government itself that is accountable and to Parliament, and the staffers and the employees are serving and are supporting and this government. So I see that certainly as a very valid principle. On the other side, there is also the authority of the House as the grand inquest of the nation and its constitutional powers to determine what it needs in terms of information.
So I just want to add a bit more to the context to what we're talking about here. One of the witnesses called Ben Chan, and his entire link to the study is one-line correspondence initiated by Executive Assistant to Mark Kilberger. And it reads as, "Hello, Ben. Thank you for your kindness in helping shape our latest program with the government. Warmly, Craig." And he responded 2 days after and saying that, "Great to hear from you, Craig. Let's get our young working." And that the story goes that that was his only interaction with the We Charity on this specific issue. Is it fair, because of this one-line communication, to calling them witness for questioning for 2 hours, in your opinion?
Well, that's really what matters. There is not my opinion, but the committee. The committee to decide in terms of any witness or question or issue that it feels it needs or not in the conduct of its constitutional authority.
My very quick last question: you mentioned about the privilege. How privilege is privilege a debatable motion? In a sense that if the committee feels that there is in fact abuse of privilege, would that be a debatable motion?
Well, the first step in terms of a point of privilege being raised would be for the speaker to determine if there is a prima facie case of privilege or not, and whether a motion can be presented thereafter. My sense is that it is a debatable motion, but I would defer to experts. My colleagues in procedural services would have more expertise than me on that particular procedural point.
Do I have any more time?
Thank you. No, you're out of time, and we'll turn to Mr. Fortin. Monsieur Fortin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dufresne, if I understood you correctly, you made a distinction between calling someone to appear and calling someone to be accountable. And the principle of ministerial responsibility, which the two ministers talked about, those are principles which would apply if we ask someone to be accountable. But here we're asking for people to testify, even if they are political staff. Is that correct about that distinction? I said there's no immunity for anyone just because of their functions. It could have to do with relevance or accountability or the role or information. Thank you. Another question, Mr. Dufresne. So if the House of Commons, if a House of Commons order is disobeyed by someone because this person did not appear, there could be sanctions imposed by the House of Commons. But in this case here, are there precedents with regard to sanctions the House could apply to a minister because the minister told a potential witness not to appear? Any precedents in that regard? Well, in 2010, a precedent which we talked about, there was a committee order at issue and not a House order. And then that issue was referred to the House, and the House defeated it, but it raised the same kind of concern. So I'm to understand there's no precedent in terms of sanctions opposed by the House of Commons. The Speaker might say a person is in contempt of Parliament, that person will be dismissed, or an MP will not be allowed to run anymore. Those are examples. Are there any precedents or not? Well, when a concern is raised that information is not forthcoming, that matter could be referred to the Committee on House Procedure. In 2011, the government was not producing the documents asked for and it invoked cabinet confidence. Then there was a motion in the House which stated that the House had withdrawn its confidence. I have another question, Mr. Dufresne. At this point here in our committee, there are some people who have disobeyed an order from the House, and this committee will report to the House. Can we propose sanctions or consequences, or do we simply report the matter to the House, and then it's up to the House to decide whether there might be any sanctions or consequences? Well, it's up to the committee to decide what it wants to include in its report to the House. On page 154 of the House Procedure Manual, it says the committee can describe the situation, explain the situation of the individuals, say if there are any issues of privilege or contempt that are involved, and the committee could also include suggestions to the House as to any sanctions which might apply. But ultimately, the House will decide what to do with the report. So
we're going to turn to Mr. Angus now. Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. Being that it is past 2 o'clock, I move to adjourn.
That's not a debatable motion. We'll move to a recorded vote. Madam Chair, if you would assist me with that.
On motion of Mr. Angus to adjourn, Mr. Dong.
Yes.
Mr. Fergus.
Oui.
Madame Latancio.
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan. Mr. Sorbera.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
No.
Dr. Carey.
No.
Monsieur Gould.
No.
Mr. Fortin.
No.
Mr. Angus.
Oui.
Yeas 4, 6. Nays contre 4.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Dufresne, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. We appreciate you coming on short notice. This meeting is now adjourned.
Merci, Monsieur Dufresne, Monsieur Bédard.